The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Support provided by Milwaukee Public Television and the UWM Center for International Education. Now here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. Today's topic, foreign policy on the Korean Peninsula. From our North American vantage point, the foreign policy of the Republic of Korea might seem to center almost exclusively on relations with Washington and concern about the regime in Pyongyang. However, in an era when Korean companies manufacture TVs in Argentina and the president makes state visits to Africa, there's clearly more to the story. Yet as Seoul's interests expand across the globe, North Korea's relations with the outside world are limited and problematic. On-again, off-again rapprochement between Pyongyang and Seoul, and the complex dynamics with Beijing continue to shape the wider regional strategic environment. To help us sort out the interests and alliances of two very different governments on the Korean Peninsula, we're joined today by Ma Sang-yoon, Associate Professor in the School of International Studies at the Catholic University of Korea, where his research focuses on East Asian politics and Korean foreign policy. He's currently a visiting fellow at the Center for Northeast Asian Policy Studies at the Brookings Institute in Washington. Well, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, I'm wondering if you could give us a little background on sort of the recent political history in the Republic of Korea, in South Korea, beginning with the end of the military governments in the early 90s.
Okay. Korea experienced a rapid kind of democratization since 1987, actually. That was the first election to Korean people directly select their president. And then a former general who became a civilian politician, elected in 97 election. And in 1993, there was another election from which we selected purely civilian president who been an opposition politician for several decades in Korea. And since that time on, Korea deepens its democratic culture. Unfortunately, however, as you've seen probably from the TV recently in Korea, there are still some kind of immature type of practices, especially in our National Assembly. But despite all of those defects, still Korea is deepening its democratic practices, and a lot of civil society groups are active, are very, very active. Right.
So, in this country, there are sort of broad brush foreign policy characteristics of the two major parties. You could say, Republicans tend to act a certain way versus Democrats. Is the same thing true in Korean politics?
Largely true. Probably many observers of Korean politics might apply a framework of conservative on the one side and progressives on the other side. So, of course, there are certain middle-of-the-road parties or groups, but largely they are divided into one or the other one. So we can say kind of similar dynamics are existing in Korea too.
And as it pertains to foreign policy, how would that be expressed? I think one obvious difference would be perhaps the approach to the north.
Okay. Yes. Actually, two policies can be discussed in that way. The first thing is about the policy toward North Korea, and the second thing is about relationship with the United States. The progressives generally tend to be soft on North Korea and trying to engage North Korea while somehow, trying to be more self-reliant in its relationship with the United States. On the other hand, conservatives are emphasizing the military security ties with the United States and other ties, of course, with the United States, and want to be more, demanding North Koreans to be more responsible and reciprocity between the two Koreas. So there are certain differences between progressives and conservatives.
And what is the role of sort of economic relations and economic concerns with regard to foreign policy?
That's a very good question. I've just given out the general framework of Korean politics in terms of progressives and conservatives, but recent developments in Korea actually makes that kind of old type relevancy of those framework is actually decreasing from my point of view, because of general public are much more concerned about the economic situation, and less attention is given to the other issues, including the foreign policy. So the progressive foreign policy and the conservative foreign policy, all of them are somehow irrelevant, increasingly irrelevant from the public point of view.
And the nexus, I would think, between foreign policy and economics is just the economy is still largely export-driven. Would you say that's a fair assessment?
Sure, exactly. Very much export-driven, and Korea is a kind of trading country, and our GDP is produced from our exports, basically. And people are, however, being much more complaining about it, and our internal market, from their perspective, should function more.
So, do you have any broad sense of the portion of the GDP that exports account for? Or is it?
I'm not quite good at the numbers, but it is. As far as I understand, it is over 80 to 90%.
Oh, okay. And so, how has that export scenario been changing in the last decade or so? I mean, I mentioned in the opening, there are Korean televisions being manufactured in Argentina, and so what is the approach in other parts of the world? I mean, we think of the U.S.-Korean trade relationship, and in fact, we can get into that a bit later on with the signing of and ratification ultimately of the free trade agreement. But what about the rest of the world?
Well, Koreans are eager to develop other export markets, not just in the U.S. and not just in the Americas, but also even in African countries, even in the Middle Eastern countries. So our South Korean companies are very much globalized, and companies like Samsung and LG and Hyundai are very much well known, and their productions are very much worldwide, globalized, I mean. So it is a global companies. Well, coming back to my previous comments on the Korean people's feeling of our economy is somehow different from that, because because our firms, global firms are already being globalized, their benefits are not really returned to the people. So that's a problem for the politicians. So the economy is going very well, relatively, but politics is quite a different problem.
Well, in a place like Africa, the story we often hear of the Chinese is basically they're in Africa to source raw materials and not much else, and not much benefit accrues to the local people. And how is the Korean model in various countries of Africa changed that, or is it?
Korean role of giving economic aids to, say, African countries are still very limited. We are trying to expand it, and the Korean government is very much proud of being an aid-giving country, which was used to be aid-receiving countries. So probably it was the only case that that kind of transformation took place. One of the focuses that Korean government is trying to do is giving a kind of knowledge how to develop, how to instead of just giving away sums of money, while teaching and let people in the local community to know how to develop their own ways of development.
Well, in fact, there are people who have said, Korea's transformation over the last 50 years could serve as sort of a template or a model for other developing countries. Is that?
That can be. I don't know whether that can be really applicable to every other countries. There's a story that the Deng Xiaoping of China closely studied the Korean model, Korean experience in 1960s and 70s. But certainly they are developing their own kind of economic strategy, even though it is starting at the outset, started from the Korean kind of model. And I believe there certainly are many different points of views in that area.
You mentioned a little bit about the perception that the benefits of this globalized economy are not being returned to the populace. Talk a little bit about the reaction to the recently ratified free trade agreement with the U.S.
Yeah, that's the point in case now. According to public opinion survey, most of the people, probably more than half of the people, agrees with the general idea of FTA with the United States, because of Korea is, as I said, it's a trading country, and our national, economy is based on trade. However, they are quite cautious in how and when that agreement should be ratified. And currently, the opposition parties and general opposition forces are arguing very strongly. Some parts of the agreement should be renegotiated so that Koreans have a more voice in determining which policy, which area of interaction should be decided by Koreans rather than by Americans.
Well, we'll talk a little bit about what's going on in the North when we come back, but first we're going to take a short break. So we'll be right back with more International Focus.
Wow.
The Institute of World Affairs presents our community with a range of public programs relating to global issues, U.S. foreign policy, and the world economy. For more information about the Institute of World Affairs, call 414-229-3220 or visit our website at www.iwa.uwm.edu.
Welcome back to International Focus. We're talking with Ma Sang-yoon about politics of the Korean Peninsula. Well, let's turn our attention a bit to the north, and start out with we needn't go too far back in history, but there was a time when the regime had an option of trying to balance two of their powerful neighbors, Russia and China. Can you talk a little bit about that historically?
North Korea was situated geographically between China and Soviet Union.
Yeah, we actually have a map here. We can take a look.
Oh, sure. And beginning from late 1950s, those two communist powers, great powers, were quarreling, which makes North Korean position very difficult. And the North Korean leader at the time, Kim Il-sung, tries to be a kind of a balanced, and it also wanted to maintain its autonomy from the meddling of either of the communist superpowers. So that's the starting point, I think, of the North Korean 주체 policy, which means self-reliance policy. And that kind of a tradition still remains in the country. And recently there was a talk about Russian pipelines getting to South Korea via North Korean territory. And in a part, there was another North Korean attempts to, keep balance between China and Russia because of recent deepening of North Korean economic reliance on dependence on China. North Korean leaders seems to make strike certain balance on that area.
Well, and the situation changed radically, of course, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And I think the Yeltsin era was not an era that brought particular comfort in Russian-North Korean relations. Is that correct?
Yes. It was a time North Koreans were asked to pay their debt to the Russians. And it was a time also that Russians refused to provide very essential materials like coal or oil to North Korea. So North Korea began their energy crisis from that time on.
And then we've seen sort of a warming during the Yeltsin period. I'm sorry, during the Putin period, right? But then yet we have Russia joining with others in sanctioning the North. So what would you say the state of relations with Russia are now?
Well, Russians are, having interest in Korean affairs, but their presence at the moment is not very substantial. Well, China and United States and South Korea are, I think, biggest players in Korean Peninsula problem, and Russians are somehow marginal. Of course, they are always trying to getting back. The Russian pipeline project is one of the means that Russia is trying to use in that regard.
Well, and the relationship with China is certainly more dynamic and I think more complex. What are China's strategic interests vis-a-vis the North?
There are many interests for China actually. I think the most important one is actually China's relationship with the United States. It is multi-layered actually type of relationship, but strategically speaking, China, the main line of the Chinese policy is to maintain North Korea as kind of a buffer zone against the United States. And of course, Chinese have another interest, economic interest. It is trying to develop the provisional, Northeast Asia, a northeast area of the China, and which is close to North Korea. And for the development of those regions, some natural resources from North Korea is very much useful, and labors, of course, are quite useful. Economic reasons are there, and strategic reasons are there. That makes China trying to keep kind of a status quo in the Korean Peninsula.
Well, and some of the more provocative aspects of North Korean foreign policy then are clearly problematic for that scenario.
Yes, yes. Well, for example, last year there was a North Korean shelling of Yeonpyeong-do in our Western Sea, and there was sinking of South Korean naval vessel Cheonan in March, and obviously China was placed in quite a difficult situation, difficult position. South Koreans asked Chinese government to put pressure on North Korea, and obviously, however, that was against China's national interest, which was trying to preserve the North Korean regime in place. So, in the back channel, but Chinese are somehow trying to exert their influence so that North Koreans are moderating somehow. That seems to work.
And how do we read some of these more provocative acts? I mean, a lot of it in this country was framed in terms of being related to succession between Kim Jong-il and trying to hand things off to his son, Kim Jong-un. Do you think that that's a valid analysis?
Well, no one really knows, but many people really believe so. Well, Kim Jong-un is a very young man who have no experience in the leadership, and he needs some kind of legitimacy, and his father should produce it for him, for his son, I believe. And the provocation is largely regarded a means to produce that kind of legitimacy for the young Kim Jong-un.
So let's talk a little bit about going forward and just the future of reunification, if there is one. How is that whole prospect of reunification perceived today among the current generation of Koreans?
South Korea. Okay. This looked quite different way in comparison to 1970s or 80s. In those days, reunification is regarded as our ultimate national goal. But nowadays, South Korea is prospering without, or even in this situation of confrontation with the North. So there's a tendency, especially among the younger generations, to see North Korea as a kind of just a provocation, which can be wish to be separated from us. So that means unification doesn't necessarily mean an ultimate national goal anymore.
Well, and is there not sort of a personal biography aspect to this, where for the families that were separated, that separation has endured for so long that the branch of the family that's across the border is not known to the current people on the other side. So for the kids growing up now, there may be an uncle or an aunt or whoever, but if they've never met them, being able to reunify with them is not a priority.
You're right. You're absolutely right. And, well, they know. Some of them, including me, know. They probably have relatives on the north, but they are, yes, probably relatives, but not sure. And even the older generations who have fled from northern side, some kind of reservations to meet their family members because of, well, there are many requests from their relatives or their siblings to regularly send a large sum of money, which is quite unknown whether they are really goes to them or somewhere else. So even for the older generations, they have some reservations to meet with their relatives.
Well, we've got less than a minute left. Any prognosis for the near term on succession and relations between North and South?
Okay. Well, the key actually is on the North Korean side. The North Korean nuclear program is being abandoned or not is the key. But there, at least in the shorter term, there's no prospect the North Korean regime will give up, because the regime is almost bankrupt in economic terms, and the regime is sustained by the police forces, surveillance systems, and their only guarantee for their survival, according to their view, is the military power and nuclear weapons.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it at that. Ma Sang-yoon, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
To our viewers, see you next time on International Focus.
For information about the Institute of World Affairs and its many programs, or to become a member of the Institute, call 414-229-3220 or visit us at our website.